We're live. And someone's singing. Okay, ready? Here we are. Welcome to the online meetup hosted by Meteor Boulder here at Refactor U in Boulder, Colorado. And we have guests from around the world tonight. We will have a discussion about Meteor and Famous. Famous is a really exciting new framework that promises to take your HTML5 apps and make them as performant as native apps on iOS and Android. It's a really interesting technology. And for anyone who's joining us from the Famous community, Meteor is a full-stack platform that allows you to develop modern web apps really easily. So these two technologies together sound really promising, and it's time for us to talk about what some of those possibilities are. So first of all, let's check in with Meteor Charlotte. Mark, are you out there?
Yeah, we're out here and excited to check out a little bit about Famous, and appreciate you guys in Boulder hosting this. That's awesome. Charlotte has been doing our Meteor meetup since probably January. That sound about right, guys? Yep. And we are growing rapidly and drinking the Kool-Aid. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, we are. Here in Boulder, we're like in the middle of we're getting flash flood alerts. We're like dreading if we're gonna have more flooding, but we got a pretty good turnout, and we're here at Refactor U. I just want to do a quick shout out to Refactor U because they're our sponsor and they've been really awesome to us. They do a developer boot camp here, and it's a full stack JavaScript boot camp that features Node.js, and they've got more products on the way. They're big supporters of the Boulder JavaScript community. I think we'll be hearing a lot more from them. So yeah, pay attention to what they're doing. There's some great stuff on the way. I'd also like to do a quick shout out to the folks at Famous. I really appreciate you guys getting the word out on Twitter and in email. And as always, Jade Wong, Yuri from the Meteor Development Group, you guys are awesome. We really appreciate all your help. They help us get networked and to figure out how to make stuff come together. Every time we do one of these, some of our guests come through the help of Meteor Development Group. So really appreciate it. So tonight we have a pretty good online audience as well. So if you didn't notice, if you're watching this live, we do have a Q&A app that comes with this meetup. So if you have questions, feel free to post them. We will we'll answer them as we can. We'll get through as many as we can. I think that's about it. We've got a great, strong panel tonight, including actually more than one person who did the closed beta on Famous. Also the creator of the Famono package, which is one of the best ways to get Famous up and running on Meteor. And then also just some developers who are already hard at work getting Famous to work with Meteor. They're the pioneers. They're going through all the hard stuff so that we can just follow in their footsteps, and it'll be really easy. So let's move on to our featured speaker, Zoltan Olah. He works for Percolate Studios. They're very well known in the Meteor community. They developed Atmosphere. Kind of the whole package system in Meteor is closely tied to their work. One of the premier developers in Meteor, and and they were also involved as a beta tester in the closed beta for Famous. Zoltan has presented about Famous to the dev shop in San Francisco, and he's also written about it online. So very happy to have you on with us, Zol. Thanks for joining us, and on to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for organizing tonight, Robert. I'm really happy to be here and to talk to you guys. And you've pretty much said it all. I'm an engineer and partner at Percolate Studio, and we're a digital studio based out of San Francisco and also Melbourne in Australia. And we do client work as well as our own projects. And yeah, we were involved early on in the private beta for Famous. So I'm hoping to give you guys a bit of a background on how Famous works. how you'd use it, what for, and also some basics on integrating it with Meteor, and just sort of using that to kind of bring everyone in the Hangout up to speed with how it works, and then to move into the discussion panel where I'm really interested to hear what these other guys' experiences are and what your questions are, and yeah, hopefully it'll be an illuminating discussion. Thank you. Back to you, Robert. Can you guys?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're very happy to have you on board. If you want to pull up your slides and kind of.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
We're launching into it. No worries.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, let's go for it. All right. Slides coming online.
So if you want, while we're waiting, we can have the other panelists introduce themselves real quick, because we have some. Do you guys just want to? I don't know. Do I need to call your names, or you just want to kind of call out and see how we get through this? Why don't we start with Rye? Go ahead, Rye Walker.
Hey there, I'm Rye Walker from Differential. We're a venture studio, so we do meteor work for pay. We have some of our own projects. We actually just took over the project user cycle recently from Ash Moria. We're big Lean Startup fans too, so excited to team up with him on taking that product to the next level. I went to the famous private beta the first week that they opened it, so it was pretty rough. There was no documentation, there was no Meteor University or famous university at the time. So, but I got through it. I have a lot of faith in the power of Famous, and we're still looking forward to our first project to work on it at Differential. But really, I'm here to maybe share a little bit of insight, mostly to hear the rest of the guys that are more active in it so far.
Awesome. Thanks, Rye. Yeah, and we should add the Differential is probably along with Percolate, it's the other big name in meteor development right now. So really appreciate you having you on here. How about Morten Henriksen?
Hi guys. Well, I'm Morten. I'm self-employed, and I've been doing free combined Meteor and Cordova apps over the past year or so. So I've been through some of the pain, but yeah, great to meet you.
It's great. Thanks for joining us. Morten developed the Famono package, which has really been instrumental in getting Famous going in Meteorland. Also, Morten, where are you and what time is it right now?
Yeah, I'm in Denmark, and it's just past 3, I think, in the morning or night.
So thank you for your sacrifice, Morten. It's really great to have you here. How about DC?
Hey there, jumping in off mute. This is DC. I'm actually English, been based in Japan for a long time, and actually I've done a whole bunch of browser-based games, mainly for all kinds of different Japanese handsets. So we're always looking for stuff that gives an edge in performance for a kind of browser experience, and haven't shipped anything with Famous yet. I think that might be a recurring theme tonight, but been experimenting with all kinds of different side projects to see the best we can get out of it. And the physics engine, it's got a lot of pretty sophisticated features buried in there, but keep hitting a few road bumps on the very, very simple things like scroll views and stuff, but looking forward to seeing the new version, which everything will be wonderful, I'm sure. That's it for me. Thanks.
Great, thanks, DC. And Matthias Cowell.
Yeah, hi. So I'm connecting with you guys from Uruguay. I'm actually from Buenos Aires, where we started a project called Bike Storming, which is a mobile app to grow urban cycling in cities. And although it's a civic app, it features some really advanced graphics, And after testing different technologies in the last almost a couple of years, last year we decided to go ahead and develop it with open web technologies, and at that moment Meteor seemed like the best way to go. So yeah, we've been working on it since I guess since beginning of this year. Actually, I met Pablo, the lead developer, at the first Meteor Meetup that we did in Buenos Aires, and although as the recurrent theme seems to be, we haven't integrated it yet in the product. Pablo has been playing with it, and yeah, I can share some insights he got from that. But we are kind of I guess this is the kind of project that needs something like Famous. The future will tell if that is the solution or not, but I think that there's clearly a need to solve the problem that Famous is addressing. So yeah, maybe we're just like early in the timeline, but it's great to have this conversation to try to figure out what that future looks like. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Matthias. It's great to have you on. Hey, I see Yuri from Meteor. I see you've joined us. You want to just say a quick hello?
Sure. So I've been playing with Meteor for the last 2 years, and I've been giving talks about it for this much time. I used to be a front-end engineer, and recently joined Meteor to help grow the community. And my job is basically to make sure that people like Matthias and Pablo meet in meetups like in Buenos Aires. And yeah, I'm joining in from Toronto right now, but I usually am based in the West Coast, Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco. Cheers.
Great, thanks, Yuri. It's great to have you on, and thanks for connecting us with Matthias. So I guess we're ready to move on to Zoltan. Zol, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Can you guys see my first slide?
Yep, looks good.
Brilliant. All right, let's launch with it. So intros are done. What is Famous? This is kind of I found this sort of slightly difficult question to answer. So it's a performant JavaScript animation engine, and I think the key thing is it's not really a 3D game engine, which is what I originally thought that it was, because what it's doing is animating surfaces or drawing and animating surfaces in 3D space, but it's not really doing any 3D modeling, which is I guess maybe the first impression that people have when they hear about it, that it's more of a 3D engine. A traditional 3D engine, so that's not quite how it works. So as a JavaScript-based animation engine, it lets you animate your HTML5 app without using CSS transforms, and it gives you a whole bunch of neat features such as a fairly sophisticated physics engine, gesture support, and an internal event routing mechanism for you to use. So what Famous is trying to solve is this issue where complicated CSS really makes the DOM crawl. And the problem there is that the DOM has to work quite hard to reflow and relay out and to crunch through the layout calculations that it needs to do to determine where your elements need to be drawn. And typically we don't really notice that too much in a web app, because we're not doing any JavaScript-based animations, but frameworks that have tried to do that in the past, for instance, jQuery's animation library, have typically been like pretty slow and not a great solution. So in order at the moment to get fast, performant, fluid animations working in the browser, we need to use CSS transforms, and to do so, we need to use this sort of cumbersome, clunky way of setting and unsetting classes, and then writing quite tricky CSS code to tap into that GPU-accelerated animation. And so that's pretty good. We've built apps like that in the past, and Atmosphere uses those techniques, and it's fast. Certainly not consistent. You'll notice sometimes the browser's just under heavy load and decides to do a janky animation, and you have no control over that. But the other thing we can't do via CSS is to do any sort of calculations that are relevant to the animations. So physics is a clear case in point that we can't do without something like Famous, because in order to do physics, we have to simulate physical equations and map those into our animations frame by frame to sort of simulate things like bouncing balls or springs. So what this really sort of amounts to helping us do, although obviously Famous is a browser-based framework, but really what people are excited about is getting the ability to write mobile apps that feel native but are in fact actually written as HTML5 mobile applications. So that I think that's sort of the main level of excitement around Famous. So I wanted to talk to you about how Famous does this, because I think it's really quite a neat trick, and it's interesting to understand what's going on at the fundamental level. So Famous takes control of the DOM, and it has this concept of surfaces, which are these flat, sort of literally surfaces that you draw your content onto. And a surface is simply a div that contains the content for your application. And what Famous will do is it'll give you a JavaScript API to manipulate these surfaces, and it'll create a flat DOM, a flat list of divs that are in fact the surfaces within the DOM. They're positioned in space using the Matrix 3D CSS transform. And the next thing that happens is window.requestAnimationFrame function is used to continuously modify what the parameters to the Matrix 3D transform are. And what that does is it animates the scene that you've drawn frame by frame. So imagine using the Matrix 3D transform to give a surface one position, and then in the next frame give it a slightly different position, and then in the next frame give it a slightly different position still. And this is the secret behind the way that Famous does its animation. And the real gem here is that modifying the Matrix 3D transform allows the GPU to draw and to calculate the repositioning of these divs, so the GPU being the graphics accelerator. So none of that complex CSS layout and reflowing logic that's built into the browser that's used to determine typical CSS layout is actually used. So Famous allows us to bypass the DOM reflow. So it's a really neat trick, and it's quite a simple idea, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg, because behind it you need a complicated math and physics library, and a neat sort of abstraction to give developers a way to gain access to this technology in a way that's that's possible to build rapidly. And so that's kind of behind the scenes of what we're actually doing. So in a Famous application, there's a concept of a render tree, and the render tree is a graph-like tree structure that you build in JavaScript that fully describes your application's UI. And it contains a tree-like structure of these surfaces, which I mentioned before, which contain just HTML and CSS, flat-out HTML and CSS. So that HTML, CSS is just like in a traditional web app. It provides the visual information for the content of your app. The other thing that you put inside the render tree is modifiers, and they allow you to position surfaces on screen. And they also allow you to perform animation by adding modifiers that contain easing functions, for instance, which tell the browser how to move the surfaces sort of frame by frame. The other thing that you do, and so you're noticing a theme here, everything within a famous application is built in the render tree. So the other thing you can do, the other information you put into the render tree is the physics information, like springiness, and you attach these parameters to surfaces as well, and then you apply forces through the physics engine to then activate these sort of physics equations that will then boil down to transforms and animate your surfaces within space. So how is the render tree different from the DOM? The main thing, I guess, that I've mentioned multiple times here is the render tree is built in JavaScript. It's not markup that is then interpreted by the internal valves of the browser. It is literally you building JavaScript. And it contains all of the animation logic and the sizing and positioning of the surfaces that define what your interface looks like. In contrast, the DOM is an internal data structure that the browser manages itself and simply gives you APIs to work with. And the CSS and the HTML markup in a typical web application is separated. And again, the browser's internal mechanisms are invoked to apply the CSS to the markup and render what's on screen. The contrast in Famous is that the render tree is calculated by Famous, and the browser really has actually very little work to do in a Famous application, apart from crunching the JavaScript that's the Famous library and your application that maintains the render tree. And so a common question or source of confusion is, well, okay, if my surfaces are HTML and CSS, and yet Famous is also doing this render tree thing, then how do I, like, where's the separation point? How do I decide, like, when something becomes a surface and when it's just simply HTML? And a good example is thinking of it as a deck of cards, where on the surface so each card would be analogous to a Famous surface. And so the static sort of, unanimated content that forms the surface of the card, the head of the queen, the number, the suit, would all be done in traditional HTML and CSS, positioned however you would normally do it. And the card itself would be a surface, and it would live inside Famous's render tree. And in fact, the render tree might encompass the entire poker table and the game that's going on. And so when the cards would be shuffled and played out in the game of poker, that would be Famous then animating those cards around the screen. So besides being two really sort of cool up-and-coming technologies that promise us developers a lot, why are Meteor and Famous a good combination? Well, Famous is great for building UIs. In fact, building accelerated UIs, and that's really its goal, and that's what it sets out to do, and I think it does quite a good job of it. Meteor, on the other hand, is so much more. It's this real-time reactive system that has packaging. It has sort of everything that you need to get started building an app really quickly. So Famous is sort of, it doesn't really have an answer for that, and it doesn't really seek to have that at the moment either. It uses a system of of more traditional style build scripts and sort of a compile, run kind of loop that we're used to. So if nothing else, it would be great to use Meteor's packaging and build infrastructure to ship a famous app. Even if that's all we could do, I think there'd be a strong case for still doing that. But in fact, Meteor brings so much more to the table. It brings this fantastic real-time data backend, and it also has this great reactive templating engine that, as you'll see, we can't necessarily use all of out of the box, but what we can use is still, a really fantastic boon to sort of developer productivity. So the general approach that we use when we build famous apps is we create a Meteor app, very simple, and we include the famous package. And then we start working on the app from the famous side and from the Meteor side, typically, in terms of getting the data wired up. But the key point is that we allow famous to manage the DOM, which means rather than rendering templates directly into the HTML body, we allow famous to take care of that using its render tree, and we use Meteor to reactively create and destroy surfaces, as well as rendering content onto the face of surfaces, which are then Meteor templates, and they're fully reactive. So, step one, famous it's quite a large framework. And to get around the problem of loading this entire framework in memory, Famous has built it using the require.js pattern. Unfortunately, that's not how Meteor apps typically work out of the box, and this was quite a large pain point at the beginning, is figuring out a good, neat solution for including the famous library inside a Meteor app without including the whole entire thing, which is, I think, now larger than a megabyte. So luckily, Morten Henriksen, who's with us tonight, built the fantastic Famono package, which means it's just as simple as doing mrt add Famono to get up and running with Famous. But Famono actually goes above and beyond just letting you use Famous. It also allows you to add Bow packages, as well as other packages around the internet that are packaged by require.js and common.js into a Meteor app really easily. And it does a clever trick where it analyzes the require load dependencies of your application, and then only ships those JavaScript files inside the Meteor bundle. So it's really neat. So we create our Meteor app, and then we mrt add Famono. So the next step in terms of integrating Meteor is what I've been talking about, where we can actually render Blaze templates onto the surface, onto Famous surfaces. And that's already a huge step forward, because Famous doesn't provide really any sort of tools for managing the HTML that goes onto surfaces. So typically, you're left with, concatenating strings. So just bringing a templating system into the mix is already a huge gain. But what's really brilliant is that Meteor templates stay reactive when they're drawn onto a surface. So really, if that's all you could do, it would still be, it would still be worth doing, because then you can, attack the problem from the other end and develop, what you'd sort of normally do in a typical Meteor application, and simply just plug templates onto surfaces. And that's really, really easy to do. This is some example code from the Famous leaderboard example that I have online that does exactly this. So really, that's sort of a big step in making this integration happen. And then the next part is the management of surfaces. So in response to changing data. So really, this is where we sort of step up the level of complexity of the integration. And to build any sort of real-world Meteor famous app, you're going to have to do something like this, right? So what we're doing here is we're tapping into the observe events on a cursor. So typically in a Meteor app, this code that we're looking at here that does a players.find would just simply route the result of that query into a Blaze template, and everything, the DOM would be reactively maintained for us by Blaze, and we're used to that level of niceness and ease of use with Meteor. However, in integrating Famous, we sort of need to go a level beyond that and actually observe the data that's coming down the wire for this query. So we'd use the added at, changed at, removed at, move to callbacks to actually then write famous code within those callbacks to manage the surfaces for us that are in the render tree that are connected to queries. So what I meant to say on the slide before is that this is a fairly low-level technique that I'm showing on that slide, and there are now actually ways to move beyond that and to use helpers to manage the render tree for us. For instance, in simple cases like lists, but they're still. I'll talk more about that later. They're still in sort of heavy development. So when you're writing a Famous app, it's important to consider that Famous is performing its animation frame by frame using the window request animation frame function. And window.request animation frame will fire, at a maximum of 60 times per second, but it will also fire a lot less than that if the browser is doing a heavy amount of work. And so it's important when you're writing a Famous application to keep that in mind and to just be aware of how much computation your app is actually doing and whether it's tying up the browser so that it can't service the request animation frame. And in Meteor, this can be tricky because the arrival of new data could trigger a complex sequence of recomputations in the dependency tree, and you may not even realize that that's happening, and you'll see an adverse impact on performance. So sort of dealing with that case is outside the scope of this presentation, but it's something that you need to be aware of if you see performance suffering, as it could be reactive recomputations. The other thing you need to do is avoid some common sort of CSS DOM pitfalls that are quite obscure and not necessarily intuitive. So Famous has put together a pretty good resource for what some of those pitfalls are and how to easily avoid them. And then, of course, this concept of mobile. So what do we need to do to get our Famous apps going on mobile? And actually, the story is very easy. The apps are no different from their desktop variations. Famous gives you a way to do responsive fluid layout with surfaces and sizing calculations. So as long as you build your apps in such a way that they'll display correctly on a smaller screen, you really have no more work to do than if you were building a desktop app. And Famous also has an API for touch events, for example, swiping and pinching and these kind of gestures. That is the other key that it gives you to be able to target mobile web. And then at that point, it's just a matter of shipping your application binary via PhoneGap And we found the PhoneGap build tool is really great and easy to use and quick to ship. Mobile web apps, famous ones included. And the great news is that there's better PhoneGap support coming from MDG. They're taking mobile very seriously, and some of these PhoneGap-based mobile web patterns that are currently quite sort of obscure and tricky to get right will be tackled by them in the near future. So that's some really exciting news. And in terms of what's left to come, I mean, better Blaze integration has been a hot topic since the start. So where I mentioned in one of my earlier slides the technique of hooking into a cursor using the observe function, that's a fairly low-level and code-intensive, error-prone technique that we're not really used to doing as Meteor developers. We're used to reactivity taking care of those sort of low-level details for us. So there's work happening. GuardyCon's Meteor Famous Components is one of these packages that's being actively developed to try and make this easier for people to integrate in a more meteoric sort of way. The difficulty in doing this is that there's a fairly high amount of work in terms of wrapping the basic views that Famous gives you, and also the necessity to wrap any additional Famous views into Blaze components that will just work out of the box in a Blaze style meteoric way. So hopefully, as the project matures, we'll begin to see something usable coming out of that that lets us have a much easier for meteoric integration there. The other area where we're seeing rapid development at the moment, and I think this will be key to seeing sort of Famous succeed, is a real community forming around Famous, and actually developers and also companies contributing open source views into the Famous community. Right now, writing low-level Famous code is, it's a little bit tricky. You really have to understand the framework very well and deal with a lot of edge cases and details. And really, the scroll view is a great example of one of these views that's had a lot of work by the Famous core developers done to it in order to make it usable for the rest of us. So as we start to see this component ecostructure becoming larger and more mature, then I think we'll begin to see the platform really succeed, because it will allow us to develop applications without necessarily doing any of the low-level nuts and bolts that, for instance, the iOS developers at Apple have already done. So, I really highly recommend everyone to give Famous a chance and learn it on its own. Even seasoned Meteor developers, I think it really benefited me to step away from the Meteor platform momentarily and really learn how to build a Famous app on its own before then stepping back into the Meteor world to integrate the two. It will really help you out. They're two sort of quite complex frameworks that introduce some pretty new ideas like reactivity, or in Famous's case, using transformation matrices to lay out and animate your interface. So give Famous a chance on its own, and then circle back and build a Meteor Famous app. And the Famous University is a really great resource that you've no doubt already seen. But yeah, I'd urge you to go through the tutorials there. And then some of the code snippets that I was showing in this slide are from a Meteor Famous leaderboard example app that I wrote for the initial dev shop talk that I did with David Fetterman, and I've updated it now to use a more recent version of Famous that's also open source. So go and check it out. That's the vanilla Meteor leaderboard example app, just thrown in and combined with Famous, and having Famous actually control the render tree. So thanks for tuning in and listening, and yeah, follow us at Percolate Studio or myself at ZQ Zoltan, and I'm really excited to participate in the panel that's about to come up and see what questions you have. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Zoltan. Yeah, thanks a lot, Zol. That was really a great overview. Actually, I learned a lot from watching it. Really appreciate it.
Excellent.
And I would like to, Mark, if you have anyone that wants to ask a question, maybe you get them ready. You guys, if you have, yeah, come up to the mic. Real quick question for people that haven't seen Famous at work. What would be a good place to see just some of the eye candy that Famous can produce?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Famous have been releasing a bunch of their demos to, oh God, I can't quite remember the name of the site. I'm having a mental blank. God.
CodePen.
CodePen, that's right. Thanks, DC. So CodePen, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that's on there, and then there's also another really good place where they've been publishing sort of their famous versions of native apps as well, which I'll have to dig out for you too. I don't know if you guys can remember that link. I probably should have prepared these before.
Okay, hey, there's an app that's part of this that I did turn on. It's called Showcase. It looks like I don't know, a couple of like price tickets or something. You're supposed to be able to post links to the audience. We've never used it before, so maybe try throwing CodePen or some of those other things up there, and maybe people will be able to see it. And
Yeah,
while you guys are working on that, we have another question over here. Make yourself, yeah.
Okay, hi. So I just wanted to ask two questions. One, you mentioned the render tree, and how that I was just curious how that might work with like Iron Router and like or any kind of routing solution, like versus like I mean you've got surfaces, so how would you render routing with surfaces?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with client-side routing, I mean, there are two components there. There's listening to the change in the route and sort of knowing reactively that the route has changed, and then doing something there based on that change. And typically, what we do is swap out the template that's loaded into the body with a different one. So routing between two pages.
Could you use that with Iron Router?
So out of the box, no, you couldn't use Iron Router the way that we're used to using it in a Meteor app. That's the short answer. Because you actually need to. Sorry?
So okay. Now the other question I got is with regards to SVG. Does Famous support SVG, or like can you render SVG paths and change them, animate them in a surface as well?
You can. That's right. Just as you would in the DOM. So
that would be really cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure in what sort of performance characteristics that might have. I've certainly seen in my use of SVGs that it can make the browser like work pretty hard, and then in that case it might not service the request animation frame callback, so you might see a degradation in performance if you're trying to animate SVGs, but certainly drawing them should be totally easy.
Cool. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, you got anything over on your end?
All right, we've got some folks thinking about questions. I actually have a question, and that is leaderboard. The leaderboard that you guys worked on is an awesome example. It looks like kind of get started, get some ideas on how to include Famous and get it going. Are there some other repos with some examples? I've played around with the Famous components to do the Blaze integration, and that's pretty cool. But you can only use the components that have been integrated at this point. So
that's right, and I sort of alluded to that in my talk as well. That's going to be the challenge with building a package like that, is sort of constantly staying on top of on top of the components that Famous provides, as well as popular third-party ones.
Cool. Well, so let's involve the panel some more. Maybe get involved in, I don't know, maybe each of you can talk a little bit about what your experience has been. Like, how close are we to being able to really use this right now? And if people just want to jump in, I know you guys have been just sitting there quiet now, so it's time to give Zol a rest and jump on in.
Rai, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to. I built the app I built before Famono existed, before Meteor was talking about components very much. Actually, pre-Blaze, now that I think of it. So yeah, my experience is somewhat outdated, but I can say that, I mean, you can basically take the example apps that Famous provides and integrate them into a Meteor app. Using the leaderboard as an example, we've played around with it. We just haven't done a production app yet. But I mean, you can see the thing I built is at Meteor. I think it's famous-chat.meteor.com, and all it was I was playing around with all the physics effects that were available in Meteor or in Famous. I think that's actually a really interesting. All the different effects that are available, and the gravity and the repulsion and all that kind of stuff is pretty cool. And so basically though, that wasn't really the intended purpose for Famous. Obviously, it's really, I think the main purpose is for mobile apps, and my little thing that I made didn't even render well on a mobile app, so it was a kind of a fail from a practical standpoint. Yeah, so I would say, again, the just integrating the demo apps that you see from Famous into a Meteor is pretty simple, thanks to all these new libraries. Not very helpful.
What about you, DC?
Well, I think, yeah, Rai touched on it there. The new libraries have made things a lot easier. I remember sitting down in a Famous hackathon and trying to integrate Famous with Meteor, and the guy was pulling his hair out, cussing Meteor for a few hours until we tried to just use Famono. And basically, Famono usually works, but I mean, that's the work of one person, which Morten is basically supporting all of these guys all over the planet, just sending him emails about, oh, how come null is undefined, like really, really deep problems that it's very hard to kind of support in userland, because they're very much in the whole kind of require functionality that's working. So as long as he keeps that magic working, then everybody else is really happy. But it's we're building upon layers on layers to get stuff to work with Famous. And also, it's kind of going against the grain for how you're used to working with Meteor. So Meteor allows you very rapidly to use, templates and kind of reactivity and all of these kind of things. My first take on writing a Famous app was it ended up just being a pure JavaScript application. Maybe more like Censure or something. Not that I've used Censure that much, but it was kind of not really taking advantage of everything that Meteor really makes easy for you. And obviously what Gadi is building with his components, Famous components, and the Meteor surface and things like that will make it much more easy to take advantage of all the kind of web technologies that we're standing on top of. Actually, Zol, I noticed in your talk there that you reference Meteor surface. Is that available in a library somewhere, or was that just a little thing that you put together?
Well, that's it ships with Famono actually. It's Morten's sort of library, so to speak. That's what it's called.
Right.
And I wrote a simple version of that ships in the leaderboard example app, and that simply just renders a template onto a surface.
Right.
So it's a very, very simple component.
Yeah. But I guess it's been kind of interesting working with Meteor and Famous. It's forced me to dig into like a little bit of an extra layer of using Meteor in terms of how you deal with dynamically rendering templates. Your UI.render and all of that kind of stuff. So
exactly.
It's helped me learn more than I wanted to know about Meteor in terms of getting the stuff done that I needed to get done. So what else? I guess until now it's been quite difficult to modify Famous itself because they've had all these Git submodules and everything, but I guess that's going away. So the frustration for me has been things like the scroll view that Famous ships with is not as good as the actual native scroll view that exists in the browser. And trying to override Famous for part of your app and take it in and take it out, you end up fighting with Famous kind of trying to consume all of the events, and it was a kind of all or nothing situation. Like either you do your whole app with Famous or you do it without. It was very hard to kind of mix and match. So I think that's maybe where Famous needs to find its kind of scalable use case. Like I want to use Famous here. Like you might have a Flash site in the old days and have a bit of Flash here and there on a few pages, but you don't necessarily want to have the whole of your website in Flash because it's not the best solution for some things. So hopefully it'll be a bit more modular, and that should accelerate usage.
So from behind the scenes, I mean, they're quite nervous in, like, the Famous engine can render the render tree into a div, for instance, on the page, and it can be contained in that way. But there are some like performance implications of doing that, and Famous Core have been quite sort of hesitant to suggest that as a way forward. They're really keen to understandably maintain the reputation of Famous as being a really performant, fast engine. And once you sort of place it into the DOM and then still sort of run into these performance pitfalls that I talked about that you might with a traditional application, then you'll be slowing Famous down as well, and the whole thing might end up being sort of pretty unusable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so quick comment.
I would just add.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say I probed that question when I was out with Famous, when they said, "Oh, you really have to give it the entire browser," and I forget who it was, Dave Valdi, I forget his full name, said, "Well, you know what? Really, we're just saying that because it de-risks their reputation, like you said. But unless you're doing other stupid stuff on the site, from what he told me, it's fine to have it be in a section." But again, that was.
I think there's a difference between having like Famous be like an embedded thing. I'm not talking about it like a YouTube player. It's more like a modal thing. So for example, this part of the site is all Famous UI, but then you go out to scroll view and you just want to have a normal scroll view. And it's like, no code is faster than no code, right? So if you can get rid of all that code and you just have a native scroll view there, then you're kind of taking advantage of the best of both worlds. But I mean, when you're writing like single-page applications, there's no such thing as a module in a way, because like everything is hanging around all the time. So trying to switch things on and off in the Famous state when you're not really switching URLs becomes a little bit more challenging, I think.
And so just to briefly sort of touch on a technical implication there, I mean, that's something that I've struggled with as well, is doing away with the native sort of feel of scrolling a page, for instance. But it really is at odds with Famous's philosophy, where the viewport of a Famous application is simply the size of the screen. That's how big the document is as far as the browser is concerned. Whereas with a typical web app, the document flows out of the screen, horizontally or vertically, and then that's where the native scrolling kicks in. So it's sort of a little bit at odds with the way Famous works, and I agree. It'd be great to figure out some sort of solution for that, at least to have a web page feel native, because it's slightly disconcerting when you come to a famous app and it scrolls a little bit differently than what you're used to, and maybe it's really similar to Safari on Mac, but a Windows user might come along and just be sort of totally feeling alien in this environment. So it's certainly would be good to solve that.
Interesting. Yeah, one thing, DC, you mentioned the Git submodules. I think they've flattened that out now. I think that's gone.
That's right.
And I'd like to. We have a couple of people who haven't talked yet. Morten, you created that Famono package. I think you've had some issues with scroll views. Would you like to talk at all about how you came to create that, and kind of comments about how things are developing and how you've tried to use Famous in your applications?
So yeah, sure. Well, I was developing an app, and it just pure Meteor, and we had some performance issues where too many images and stuff flowing around and trying to feel native. Well, Famous just went public beta, and I thought, well, let's try it out. And I think I wrote Famono in about 3 or 4 hours or so, just to get up and running and testing stuff. Like the others said, one of the main parts in working on mobile is the scroll view. It's the biggest thing. Just to get stuff scrolling properly is, well, that's a big issue. I actually ended up not using Famous because the scroll view at that time was, well, it had some bugs, and events wasn't consistent, and, well, it's a public beta, so it's not ready for production at all, I think. And, well, I just had to go back to the drawing board, and I actually ended up making some components, like a scroll view that simply uses the iScroll, and that means that, well, the iScroll actually uses the native scroll if possible, so you get a better feeling and a bit more control. And again, if we can integrate Famous the same way, I think we have, create some components. It would be a more Meteor way of working, I think. I also did a page view that, well, that could, handle pages and scroll from one side to another, and unloading templates and all stuff like that. Yeah. So. But basically, it's Famous. If you cut it down, it's very simple, and the part that goes beyond for me is the physics, and the transforms, where you can put in some equations instead of relying on the built-in CSS animations. Yeah. So you get a bit more control. And one last part is mixing, request animation frame with reactivity. We have to have a way of maybe have reactivity somehow queue up or fit in to the animation frame or some. Yeah. I think that's the media part that could be improved.
Hey, Matthias, you want to just talk about what you guys are doing?
You're muted, Matthias.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Cool. So actually, one thing that I was going to share, someone mentioned it already. The experience that we had was is at this point that we're in the process of developing the app actually, and one of the reasons that we chose Meteor for is the quick iteration on the development. And what I feel that Famous comes to add is something that seems to make more sense in a moment where the app is where a product is more polished. So it's something that doesn't really make sense. What happened to us was that it didn't really make sense to invest in polishing a product while in an early phase of development. So the experience Pablo had when, just when he got his hands on Famous and started and took some content from Famous University, he's really excited about it, but sort of felt that the time he had to invest in producing these advanced animations just didn't make sense at an early point in the development. So what I agree with you guys is that it seems to be a challenge to have a way to more quickly integrate the value that Famous brings to the table into the development of products. So, in order to gap this thing between like the promise of what it can bring and actually implementing it in production, I can see, at least just looking forward to it, some sort of like animation packages coming into some standardized behaviors that you would expect from an app. That's some wish list, but hey, we're talking about this kind of stuff, right?
I would just add to that, like, my experience with it was, I'm a developer primarily. I sat down to work on my first Famous/Meteor app and realized I had no plan of what animations I was going to do. In other words, you really need to have a UI designer who knows what they're doing to plan ahead what to build, because it's not like building a website where you can just tweak things and build it up over time. You have to plan that stuff out, and that's a different workflow for me as well.
Yeah, and then to add to that, as a web developer, I mean, you need sort of a whole different set of sort of skills to be able to translate that designer's wish to get something flying over here to this part of the screen and flipping around, and we just don't do that typically in web development. So you've got to sort of dive in and skill yourself up more in like a game programming style of development, which I certainly found and find challenging still.
Right, so like how do you wireframe stuff flying around, right?
Exactly.
That was one thing that came up when discussing with Pablo on how we would integrate Famous. He's a developer, I'm the designer, so I usually ask for like we have conversations of sort of like stuff flying around and fading in and out, and like really advanced stuff happening with graphics. So at one point I tell him like, well, can you send me a link to behaviors that we could produce or look forward to integrating with Famous? And he's like, there's no link, because you can move things in any direction at any speed, and with the whole physics things. So I guess it goes back to the same point that keeps coming up, which is would be great to see some like potential behaviors that you can integrate, as sort of like it's not user experiences or interface, but it's just like behaviors in the surfaces and the components of your app, and also like to consider that this is something that comes like further down the pipeline when like your features are clear and what the user does is clear, and then you just add the famous cream on top of it and not like underneath. Because otherwise, like if you move the cream when the whole cake is finished, it's like you're gonna make a mess.
Well, I guess the designers have had tools like Flash as well, but has anyone worked with the scene stuff that's coming out of Famous, which is a way of describing, scenes and layouts and everything in a JSON format? It's kind of like going halfway between a visual format, a code editor, and a way of just speccing out scenes.
Nice. No, I hadn't.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that was still in very early development a few months ago, but
right. Okay. Yeah, so I guess maybe someone will make an editor. I mean, because Meteor has all of these, real-time reactive stuff, you could presumably just edit these scene files and instantly see your famous scenes update in real time. Be nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, what I found with that is, yes, it is somewhat cumbersome to build up your scene in JavaScript, and that would certainly save some time in being able to define it, in JSON or a templating format. The real trickiness is in implementing interactions and animations, and you can't really sort of do that unless you have a very complex visual editor, like, for instance, what Flash has. Otherwise, you're still going to be left with trying to figure out how surfaces are sending events between each other and where they are in space and doing these kind of calculations. So whilst it does, it will save people time in being able to like visually compose their scene, there's still a lot of work to build out those interactions.
Well, effectively, you have to wire up the functions. I mean, there have been a few tools, like people using Flash for building front ends for like PlayStation games. Mm-hmm. So you're not using Flash as the final environment, you're just using Flash to kind of lay out your scene, and then it calls stub functions that are then implemented by the developer. I mean, that might be one option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
I think I'd like to. We haven't taken any questions from the internet yet. Can you guys see the Q&A app that we have there? You can select any that you want. I'm going to pick one right now that should be featured at the top now. From Randall Elliott saying, "I'm currently using Meteor plus Famous for simulations and prototypes. Curious if anyone else is. Also curious if anyone has taken it from there to production."
I haven't used it for simulations and prototypes. I'm curious to learn more about what that might be. And no, we haven't built a production Famous app at this stage.
And you guys have anything in production yet? We're still kind of learning how it works. Is that where we are?
Well, I've been testing Famous, but and for 2 apps. But still, the scroll view is very important to have. So, I'm waiting.
And Matthias, bike storming, does it have any components in it right now that are using Famous or not?
Not yet. Not yet.
I think that gives us some idea as to where things stand. And it's still early days for this.
Yeah, we have nothing in production either.
Can I cut in the queue real quick? So just a quick, housekeeping thing. If anybody has any relevant links, because it's pretty late in most parts of the world right now, and for those people who are watching, if you want to continue the discussion or just paste relevant links or just thoughts, I think the event Google Plus page will still be up. I think that would be a nice place to post links there for now. We'll figure out a nicer way to aggregate useful links like that and surface them later on. But basically, if you've participated in this Hangout or watched it and you have some links you'd like to share, I think it would be nice to post them there. And then Robert is probably going to make a roundup email or something like that to include the most relevant ones, so we can follow up with that. So in case people want to see some stuff live, I think that would be useful. And I have a quick question for Zol. I guess the main question for a lot of people right now would be like, in which cases, because Blaze has been advancing pretty fast lately, and it's got much better. And basically, the question is like, if you're building an app, at which point do you think it makes sense to start thinking about using Famous and switching some like the UI to Famous, and in which sort of optimization problems it can solve, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question, Yuri, and we were sort of discussing this a little bit earlier with Ryan. I think Famous at the moment sort of occupies quite a niche in terms of you can write a mobile web app using HTML5 without Famous, just pure Meteor, and we've done that, and it's worked great, and we've used CSS transitions to sort of get pages, neatly animating from left to right, and some of those like basic ideas that you see in a native app. And our mileage has gone quite far with that, and in fact we've been able to tap into like this rapid development cycle that Meteor provides. Now I think the niche where Famous really sits is when you take a native app and you swipe around and you see all this, all these great transitions, things flying around, pages turning, and responding really closely to your gestures and sort of stepping outside of those typical sort of form-based interactions that you might sort of use in a very standard app. If that's the kind of app that you're going for, and you really do want to build it in native to sort of leverage the cross-platform nature and your web knowledge, then that's where I'd really look at using Famous. But if your app is pretty standard, your value add for your customers isn't based around having like really flashy interactions, that's not what's going to get your app to the top of the App Store, then you're probably better off at this stage sticking to a more traditional mobile native app. Whereas if the selling point of your app is to compete in this space of very sort of flashy, advanced user interface elements, then you should probably look at Famous from an early on point, because you'll be spending a lot of time developing that part of the application and very little time developing the Meteor part, because Meteor is so fast to work with.
How did you get Atmosphere? So does atmosphere.js.com use any Famous, or is it all custom CSS animations?
It's CSS animations. It doesn't use Famous.
Because there's some really pretty stuff when you go to search or some other stuff, and it feels like, but it's all custom, right?
Yeah, it's all custom.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. I think Yuri is making a good point. It's pretty well. It's very late in some of the places where people are meeting, and it's probably good to get us wrapped up. We've gone pretty deep into some of these topics, and people will want to digest that. So, any final thoughts from the panelists?
We're planning a hack day in Buenos Aires around Meteor and Famous, just as a way to get people with their hands on both technologies. And one thing we're discussing with the folks organizing is like where you would start if you wanted to build something that brings value. Even if it's like a concept, just experience, like digital experience that brings value from both platforms. Like if you think of a minimum product that brings something to the table from both technologies, what would come to your mind? Like from the different panelists, would love to hear that.
I think it's a tricky question.
It's a complicated question.
I think we'll take it offline to the links and other discussions, and I'm pretty sure last time Velocity spun out of the online meetup, as I know. We'll see what comes out of this one. I guess I'll add a quick note from my side.
Sure.
So first of all, huge thanks to Robert for organizing online meetups, because it brings a lot of different people together. We actually don't know like how many people are here right now watching us, or maybe Robert can see that on his admin dashboard, but I can't. And hello to you all, and thanks for joining. My role as a community engineer is to help people learn and for everybody to be productive in the system. So basically, if you want to host a meetup in your local city that does not have a program right now, you should email me at Yuri, Y-U-R-I-Y, @meteor.com. or ping me on Twitter, HTML5cat. Yeah, because there's a lot of cities that we haven't covered yet, and we're going to cover them soon. And it's really easy to host meetups in real life, and it's really awesome. So do get in touch with me about that.
That's great. Thanks, Yuri. Appreciate you coming to join us. That's your help has been really instrumental, and we're looking forward to having more meetups to interact with in the future. So, unless anyone has any quick announcements.
I just had one last thing to say, Robert. Sorry. That I think that maybe we came, or at least I came across as somewhat negative about Famous and Meteor and all that. I really think that it's just very early, and I'd love to see someone master Famous from the Meteor community and see what's truly possible through this. Like, understanding all the physics, creating components. You can create components inside of Famous down to that level of detail. I think that there is a lot of potential with this. If someone can get that competence, we'll hire you.
Awesome. That's actually probably a great thought to finish on. So unless anyone else has anything, we'll probably close it off. Any other last comments? Okay, I think we'll finish it out then. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's really great to have such a strong panel of people that actually have experience with such a new technology. Thank you all, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for organizing.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Robert.
Bye.